This now. International Relations Minister Naledi Pandor says South Africa has made its feelings known to the proper channels. This after China has been accused of mistreating Africans as it fights the coronavirus. How does this affect China's relationship with the African continent? Well, Bob Wakesa is a research and partnership coordinator at Wits University, and he joins us now on the line. Mr. Wakesa, thank you very much for your time. So, the mistreatment of Africans in China, being accused now of being the carriers of the coronavirus, how does it affect the relationship between the Asian tiger and the continent?
I think it does affect the relationship in a major way because over the past couple of years, there's been talk of global South-South solidarity between African countries and China in the global setting. In other words, Africa and China have forged a relationship to kind of contest relations with the West. You remember that during this pandemic, there's been talk of the U.S. not being very supportive of the continent, in fact, pulling out of the WHO. And therefore, the Africans were actually looking to some extent to China for support in a sense. So these racist attacks in Guangzhou, in southern China, will actually put the relationship on a strain at a time when countries were actually looking to forge a partnership.
Let me ask you this question then. I'm sorry to interrupt you there. At least one country that I'm aware of, which is South Africa, through its International Relations Minister Naledi Pandor, it says it has made its feelings known to, that's through the proper channels. But are other African countries that are heavily dependent on China for funding, will they be brave enough to express this ill feeling towards the treatment of people there?
No, I think apart from South Africa and to some extent Nigeria and Ghana for that matter, other African countries will be muted. As we actually saw, the diplomatic channels that were leveraged were such that they were not very candid, although they sent protests. Although they did, the African ambassadors based in Beijing did a joint statement, but it was not really a major protest as would have been expected. And this, as you rightly say, ties back to the fact that African countries are heavily dependent on China. Many of them actually have loans for infrastructure development. Many of them are dependent on the export of their raw materials to Beijing. For that reason, they are hamstrung. They are on the back foot. They can't really stand up to China in a big way, even in these circumstances.
Yeah. What about the BRICS relationship, the countries that form part of that? And of course, South Africa is key among those. It's already expressed its feelings. Again, I remind you of the message from the Minister of International Relations. How do you think that relationship is going to be affected going forward?
I think from that perspective, you will see that, again, China's financial muscle comes into play. And I think it's almost a replication of the relationship African countries have had with big economies of North America, in the U.S. and Europe. Because when you're dealing with a hegemony, and that's actually what China is today, with its big financial muscle, you think twice before you say, look, you've not been very fair to our people. And in any case, this relationship between Africa and China is pretty good at the high level point, you know, the level where we see the ministers of foreign affairs, the presidents and so forth engaging. But at the lower level, there is xenophobia and racism. And thereafter, sometimes there's a distinction. You talk of relationship at the street level not being good, but relationship at high levels being good.
Yeah.
And we see that the BRICS is pretty important, particularly for countries such as South Africa, because there is a new development bank which is actually assisting South Africa in plugging some of its budgetary deficits that come with its being downgraded and so forth and so on.
Mr. Wakesa, just very briefly for me, my final question, you raise very interesting contradictions here that may be at play. How does this situation playing itself out in China, how should it be defined or described? Is it xenophobia? against Africans, or is it pure racism? And if it is racism, is it only starting now, or has it always been there?
I think the attacks, first of all, one must remember that it's not the first time that they have happened, particularly in Guangzhou. If you look at the Chinese geography, Guangzhou is in the southern part and is the trading manufacturing hub. It's the so-called factory of the world. And that's where most Africans from around the continent head to get their merchandise to then come back and sell on the African continent. In 2012, in 2013, in 2016, and so forth, there have been those kinds of low-grade attacks. But then the pandemic, the virus, COVID-19, provided the perfect foil, provided the best context under which these attacks based on race will spike. Because you remember that Guangzhou also hosts Europeans, Latin Americans, North Americans, and so forth. But these attacks were directed towards Africans. Yeah. And therefore, we see that racist, xenophobic direction in which it was done. Even though the reports we are hearing were that, in fact, some Africans had contracted the disease and were actually not self-quarantining or self-isolating. However, this is a disease that's affecting everybody. So this just shows that at the low level, at the street level, at the downstairs level, if you wish, the relationship might not be as good as high up there.
Dr. Bob Wakesa, thank you very much for your time.